Excellent. Thank you again for our great conversation we had on Monday. Excited about today's agenda. We're going to get a lot done. So by the end of today's meeting, we need to have and approve the documents that we'll use for our individual outreach, as well as have a plan for the timeline of outreach in mid-December through mid-March, and to understand how the task force members will communicate with one another about co-hosting the meeting. So we have a lot to do. So we're going to skip our icebreaker and jump right in. How's that sound? Excellent. So on Monday, we did approve the final version of the task force charter. Thank you for that. So Maddie or Emmett can email that out to members after today's meeting. And we left off kind of in the middle of the discussion on outreach moving forward. And I want to remind members that we need to stay focused today on the materials at hand as we plan on moving forward and really starting to get our work going. And for myself, as I mentioned a little earlier, I do have an urgent or pressing meeting that has come up here at City Hall in Duluth for my official duty. So Commissioner Robert Davis will facilitate the second half of today's meeting in my place. And I'd like to thank her for willingness to do that at this time. So Commissioner Davis, are you on? I can't see everyone on the screen. Okay.
She's not on yet. She will be joining, I think, around 10:45. She had a prior commitment this morning.
Excellent. Thank you. So for let's in your materials, I want to move us down to the discussion to finalize the guide for the meeting host. If you have that in your packet, Maddie, you're going to share your screen. Outstanding. Perfect. So this document is meant as a guide to help each member of the task force conduct outreach with different communities and to record the information collected during the outreach meetings. It should be used in conjunction with the outreach questions and outreach tracker documents. And task force members will act as co-hosts for outreach at the meetings. So one person can serve as a facilitator and the other might serve as a note taker. So as we look at our public engagement, the best practices, remembering that the following best practices is we want to focus on building relationships to help people feel comfortable and increase participation. Set expectations and let participants know the meeting is focused on listening and to learn rather than rebuting everyone's present. And to create a list of expectations ahead of time. I won't read through all of these, but I do want to focus on remember the 4 C's of trust, and that is competence, caring, consistency, and communication. I'd love to hear any follow-up that you may have about the public engagement best practices. And I think we have. And also want to remind that we do have the opportunity to use our chat function as well. So what are your thoughts about the best practices? And we can use the raise hand function as well in our chat. Okay, Ted, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, will we speak later about the, I like the final bullet point is don't promise that decisions will be made about specific parts, that the meetings are to gather information, not, there's no need to be defensive or to try and argue to win with the group. But there we go, it's the bullet above that. Follow up after meeting, sharing updates about the result of your conversations. Is there will we be speaking later about a process, either participants providing their email addresses, or that there's some, we develop some sort of, we call it newsletter or communique, so that people know or see some of the hundreds or so issues that are presented? What offers might be made to participants about what they've said and how they might follow up on that?
Okay.
That's all.
Thank you for that. So this is for participants, not for us who will be convening the meeting.
Correct. Both are needed, but it appears on this that it's promised. So I want to find out how that happens.
Great question. Thank you. Christina, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that as a guiding document, it looks thorough and it looks complete. So I'm fine with everything in here. I like Ted's question about some more information about follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
But you're asking for input, so there's mine.
Excellent. Thank you. Other voices? Anything stand out as far as the public engagement best practices?
I have my hand up, but I don't know if you can see it or not.
No, I couldn't. I don't
Okay.
see this.
Neat.
I
Okay.
can't see all the.
Oh, okay. So I think it's very well thought out. I like the idea that, we should be focusing on building relationships. And I do think we maybe should add a time to when we put our agendas out, so that the conversation doesn't go beyond what the focus of the meeting is. And so, like, with each point that we're trying to, convey and get feedback on, to have a time, on the suggested time on the agenda when we do these outreach discussions, so that, we can kind of stay on task.
Excellent. Thank you.
I have a question. This is Patricia Torres Ray. There is a line here about, listen instead of being defensive. I think there is a lot in this statement in terms of how many times, and I will speak to my experience as a legislator, when we do have community participation, and we understand that, there are experiences that people bring to our attention that are their own experiences, their own beliefs, and their own understanding of what we need to do. Whether that, connects or is part of what we need to do is a different thing, right? People have their own understanding, their own lens. So how do we really make this statement real when we say not being defensive, but being realistic and having the information in front of us to simply offer with respect, feedback, right? Because when somebody comes to you, for instance, and say, climate change is not real, you made it up, there is no science behind that, and you listen with respect, you have to say, well, there is science behind it. And we have it, and we're making this decision based on that. And then you go on to explain. So it's not being defensive, but of perhaps the perspective that we take into account to make a decision. And I think we need to expand that sentence to say that, because many times people feel patronized that they listen, that we listen, that we express support or somehow sensitivity, and then went on to do whatever. We went on to make our own decisions. That's kind of their interpretation. Or, well, we told you this multiple times, but then you went on and made your own decision. And that was because we failed to say, well, we listened to you out of respect, but we couldn't possibly take into account, your direction, because it's not based on science. I'm just using that as an example.
Thank you, Senator. That's great insight. Other thoughts about that one statement? Is there a way we can challenge that? Listen instead of being defensive. I like what you said about listening with respect. Is there a better way we can convey?
I was going to say with that, does it help that we're not really a decision-making task force? Like we are actually just compiling opinions and perspectives. So we could make that clear that we're listening and recording information that we receive from the people at the meetings, but we can't promise how, like we'll share what we compiled and we can share the actual document when we provide it to the CAP board. But is there a way of, I feel like it's a little different than something like the decisions made about environment with climate change because of the fact that we're not the ones actually deciding about what's going to be the art. We're just actually compiling the information. I guess more like a research team. How does?
Yes. Yes, I like that. And I think if I recall from our meeting on Monday, is to really be important and be thorough in leading with that statement of what the task force is there to do. And you're absolutely correct. We're not there to make decisions on what artwork or monuments are there, but to gather this information, right? And share that with the CAP board. But you can still always encourage folks to be in contact with the CAP board if there are strong feelings about that. Geeta, did I miss you? I saw your hand was up. I'm having a problem seeing the faces on the screen. So
that was me that just said that about the
excellent.
Researching, and I agree that that's great. I hadn't known that it would be interesting to have that available, like an email or a form that they could fill out if people had specific strong feelings, that we could provide them with that proactively during our session, so that that would even maybe help with that understanding.
And I think posting that somehow, somewhere would also be key, as folks has as a reference point too. I know often sometimes I hear with my eyes as well. So it's great to have a reference point. Ted, I thought I saw your hand up.
Just before the meeting started, some of us were talking about the subject came up with a large number of people who would like to go to the Capitol, but for various reasons haven't. Or I actually, during the preservation of the building, I ended up putting a slideshow together and delivered it about 40 times around the state. And what I always found in talking with people is that I would say the majority of people I spoke to as adults had last been at the Capitol in 5th grade in their bus trip, and some had never been. So it proved to be some interesting things, but I've been thinking about that issue and our idea of getting a larger public involved. And I would like to, a couple things came to mind. One is that I think it's really, could be very important for everyone to know that whether or not they have been specifically at the state capitol and walked through the memorials and monuments and were fluent in those, doesn't really, that would be nice if they did, but it's not critical. The key is that everyone that shows up has been at places where there are memorials and monuments, whether it's at a cemetery or a church or other public spaces, their county building or their city hall. So they're familiar with that, or even in their high school where you have the trophy case. So we're familiar with monuments. And so that, I think, number one, that would be for me, that will be an important message to get across to an audience, to say, we were interested in input that way. One, and there's a separate point too that came to mind, a sort of a reminder, and that was when Cass Gilbert won the competition to design the state capitol, and for the first 8 years as it was being designed and under construction, from 1895 to 1903, he was adamant that there would be art at the Capitol and that no art would represent people or historic moments. And when it came to the legislature gathering in 1903, he talked to enough legislators, or he was tuned in to the fact that virtually every legislator had been in the Civil War, and if nothing else, we needed to memorialize that, et cetera. So the agreement at that point was that historic monuments in the state capitol would be inside rooms that would be locked, and the main public areas would all be, as those main public areas are, metaphorical and allegorical paintings, not of gods, but of ideas that reminded us of people. Well, it's a long way of saying that basically he lost that battle, and it was a little, in retrospect, his view of never using historic paintings. The governor's painted portraits didn't occur for another 50 years, show up for another. That it was probably mistaken that in fact most of us need to look at historic figures to remind us of important issues and important moments, ideas. So anyway, I'm not sure that I think it may be important to realize that the issue of dealing with historic monuments and that whole idea of memorials is in fact it's an interesting issue that we might, anyway, I think it's an interesting issue that we can universally face. That's all.
Excellent. Thank you, Ted. And Christina, I see your hand is up, and then I'm going to ask that these are really, really great, strong ideas, and we want to suggest that being specific, we want to make specific edits to this document because we need to agree on the language here. So thank you for your input. I'm going to end with Christina's question, and then we're going to move on to tracking input. Christina.
This statement, listen instead of being defensive, to me has to do with how much I actually say about the monuments, about the art, about anything within the state capitol. If I'm trying to get people to speak up and share their experience and their feelings, then the more I say to defend monuments or defend the art that's already in the state capitol is only going to work against that conversation. So maybe this should say, listen without prejudice. And so that would mean, and I appreciate Ted's point, but I don't think these meetings are the educational platform to teach people how to engage with monuments. I think these meetings are information seeking opportunities to find out where people are feeling disconnected. I mean, I totally understand people having a learning curve, but that is not, I don't think this is not the space for that. So that's how I read this. I feel like I can't go into a meeting and defend or explain or educate about what already exists as a primary focus. If someone were to ask and I had some information, I might keep it really short, but I think I need to listen without prejudice.
Excellent. Thank you. And Maria, I'm sorry, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I know. You said we're going to end there. I just wanted to add just some simple notes as an artist. Before we present, we always ask, why does a work of art look like this? Who made it and why? I think about the W's. What does this mean? So if there is a representation of historical inquiry behind there that is offensive and someone's trying to explain why we shouldn't feel offended, that kind of adds to what Christina was saying into, I'm already feeling traumatized entering a space. How do you heal me from that? And so we can't move forward until we've addressed that there's an understanding. And I think that needs to be inquired of we can't grow without recognizing the roots, and so I just wanted to inquire, why is this here? who made it and what's the background for any public art that's going to be displayed.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. So if I'm hearing correctly, we're kind of feeling that the listen instead of being defensive is a little problematic. So we can definitely make those changes if you can and get those over to Maddie or Emmett. And we can continue to move on. We're going to move now down to tracking the input. So before each meeting, determine which task force member will be the facilitator and which will be the note taker. And I know there's so many skills around the table, but some of us may be more comfortable forward facing, leading the group, and some are more comfortable with note taking. But I'm going to challenge us all to push our comfort zone and take turns as we're able to learn and work through this. So the note taker should be tracking the main ideas that each participant in the meeting discusses, and then the themes that begin to emerge from the discussion. The note taker is responsible for recording this information along with other reflections, and I think this came up before, other reflections and takeaway from the meeting that emerge. Any thoughts, ideas about this? And then most importantly, the co-host should then send the outreach tracker spreadsheet to myself and to Maddie so that we could be added and compile the list. Thoughts, ideas? And yes, Maddie, if you can pull up the spreadsheet, maybe folks need a visual, and Christina?
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was a mechanism for collecting information, inputting information, and then also, is there a mechanism for folks attending the meeting to share their email addresses, since I'm assuming we're going to be doing this virtually. It won't be easy to walk around a room with a clipboard and get folks to fill out contact info. So as we have people participating, are there thoughts about getting email addresses in particular? That's really all I'd be interested in, and maybe zip codes. I love zip codes. I am a little bit of a data nerd. But if there's a mechanism in place that's easy for us to utilize, I would be interested in knowing what that is.
Okay, yes, and there is going to be a mechanism there. Representative Erdahl, welcome.
Good to be here. I was having a little technical difficulties earlier, so.
Yes, happy you're here. And you did let us know last meeting that you would be coming in slightly late after 10, so welcome.
Well, thank you, and assuming we are going to be done by, got another meeting at 12, so.
Yes, thank you. It is our hope we'll be done at a
yes.
Timely. Maria, is your hand still up? Okay, and then I see Geeta, is your hand up?
Are we supposed to talk about the sharing emails or those kind of details? Because I was just thinking in Zoom, I know there is the private chat that you can chat to one specific person. So maybe participants could just email their email or chat their email address to one specific person privately in the chat if they're comfortable sharing it that way. That's just one idea I had for what Christina brought up.
Excellent. And please, if you can, capture that and send that over to Maddie, as we'll be compiling a list of suggestions. That's really great. Alicia, I see your hand is up. Alicia, you might be on mute. There you are. No? Okay.
I'm sorry. Could you ask people to register in advance for the meeting? Because then you would already have their address, their email address already. So and I don't know if there's a way you can put in a zip code or other information, but just have that registration information in advance.
That's a great thought, and that's one that we haven't had a chance to fully talk about as a team, is how we are going to solicit folks to come to the meetings, whether it's marketing or how we're going to do outreach, and are we going to have a pre-registration? And that's something that we could kind of put in the parking lot and come forward with that as we work toward what those sessions are going to look like. Great suggestion.
This is Emmett here. Can I just add that one of the options also on the email addresses front is, and we can get to this when we come to the questions in the survey, but if folks that are participating in the meeting fill out the survey during a part of the agenda, there can be an option on that survey for them to provide their email address in order to get the full copy of the report emailed back to them once it's complete. So that would be another option for recording email addresses for individuals who take part in the meeting. And we could either make that a required element of the survey online or an optional element. That would be up to the group.
Excellent. Thanks, Emmett. Do you know, are we gonna have a pre-register for the sessions?
I think that would be up for this group to talk about, and I think I could just lay on the table a couple of pros and cons. Certainly, I think the biggest pro would be that folks that are hosting the meetings would have a sense of how many people they might expect and whether or not they would be able to have everyone together or in breakout rooms. For example, if you imagine 40 people at a Zoom meeting, there would likely need to be breakout rooms for smaller group discussions. So that's one pro. The other pro would be, making sure that we're recording people's information so that we can share back out reports to them. I think one of the difficulties there would simply be that it requires additional work and coordination and planning on part of the co-hosts, and so would just potentially impact other elements of the planning and the amount of time that people would be willing to invest in each of these meetings.
Excellent. Thank you, Emmett. Christina.
I'm kind of for and against pre-registration, but one of the things I do like about it is it gives us an opportunity to send a reminder to folks.
Excellent. Thank you. Great suggestions. Again, please, if you have any other suggestions, forward those to Maddie or Emmett, and we'll continue to compile those. In front of you right now, we have the spreadsheet. And this is a document we want to be comfortable with moving forward. So we have our main ideas, then our key themes. I can't read all of the fine print. Maddie, if you could read the outreach questions. Most of you have those in front of you. Does everyone have the outreach questions? Okay. We're going to go through those. Well, actually, we're going to go back through those. Let's continue. There we are. Let's continue down the document that we're working on. We're going to go back to the outreach questions, and I believe that's something that's you're going to go through those during the second part of the meeting. So right now we're looking at the meeting agenda and how we will participate in handling or running the meeting. And of course, the introductory exercises, which is something we've all been doing since we've been meeting. So the facilitator begins by asking participants to share a formative experience about art and how it made them feel. And for most of us, we remember the impact that it had on our first meeting when we were able to share that discussion. And then the co-hosts will briefly talk about the background of the CAP board and the role of us as the task force. And I know this came up a little bit earlier, again, emphasizing what our role is and what is the role of the CAP board. And by the end of the PowerPoint, participants should be able to answer the following questions. And that is, who makes decisions about the monuments at the Capitol? Why have I been asked to participate in today's meeting? How will my input be used by the host? And how will I know that my input has been taken into account? Then there will be a group discussion where the facilitator will lead the discussion and focus on the open-ended questions, as you'll go over those a little bit later here. And then also we have the reflection questions, and participants may share reflections and discussions they may have. Any thoughts or comments we have on the agenda 1 through 6, those bullet points? Christina.
How long are we managing these meetings? Are they an hour, 2 hours?
Great question. Emmett or Maddie, have we decided that?
One suggestion, and this was in conversation with Mariah, who presented to this group during the initial meetings a couple of weeks ago, and who does a lot of engagement work like this, is that over her experiences that with the Zoom or virtual format that, and with the content here, that a 90-minute meeting might make the most sense, with the understanding that 60 minutes might not be enough time for all folks that are participating to feel as if they've been able to share their perspectives and reflect with the other members of the group, but that a 2-hour meeting, unless there's a break and unless it's clear ahead of time that it'll be a 2-hour meeting, that's difficult for folks. And so 90 minutes is the staff recommendation, but certainly doesn't have to be that way if the group feels strongly about any other time frame. I
think 90 minutes sounds appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I have a concern that our introductory exercise will take at least an hour if we have 40 people in the room. I mean, if everyone spoke for a minute, that would be 40 minutes. And so I'm wondering if there's another icebreaker that we could come up with. When we did ours, it took us well over an hour to get through our entire group to answer the questions. So I don't know that the introductory exercise fits very well into a 90-minute meeting.
Okay.
Especially since I feel like I want to have most of the conversation about the outreach questions.
That's a great point, Christina. And again, let's make sure we capture that with Maddie. Maybe we come up with some shorter icebreaker questions. Good catch. Representative Erdahl.
Well, I think that 90 minutes is, but we have to be flexible, I think, obviously, depending on the types of questions and the length of time that it go through them is important. We can't just be cutting them off. So I 90 minutes is a good target, but people need to understand, and we do, we could be running longer.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Thank you. Alicia.
I think 90 minutes sounds right. Everybody's kind of Zoom fatigued. So I think if we set that expectation and saying, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and if you don't get your perspective and be able to share it, to be able to send it into, whoever, I don't know if we're going to enable the chat function, but maybe, you ask that question of an formative early experience and have people put that in the chat function, so then they know that they have been heard and then it's been documented and we have that information. So that would be my suggestion.
That's a great suggestion, Alicia, and we will make sure we capture that. As some folks may not want to have their voice in the room, so to have the chat function would be great. Geeta.
I just had a couple of thoughts too, and I guess we're supposed to email them to Maddie, but I also agree that maybe there could be a 15-minute grace period at the end where anyone that wants to hang around that didn't feel they had a chance to actually talk on Zoom with the facilitator and the co-host, maybe there could be a little grace period where people can leave, and then if anyone still wants to speak verbally, that would be an option. And then also the idea of the where you have the facilitator, the introductory exercise could be another option for small groups, because there could be some communities that 10 people show up, and then it might be really nice to have a more intimate group where people do share something more personal like that at the beginning. That was all I was thinking.
Thank you, Geeta. And as you go through this process, and we build our teams with co-hosts, you'll get a good feel of, how the meeting is going, how the questions are being captured, and where the dialogue is hitting. And I think it's going to be up to you to decide as well if you wanted to go slightly longer or if you felt comfortable with it just going the 90 minutes. Ted, I see your hand is up.
Just my 2 cents. I would love to have a meeting that is aggressively planned for an hour with a sense that the meeting site will be open for 90 minutes, and try to design it so that we can encourage people to speak, not needing, and the idea of not needing to defend a point of view, but to just merely state it, that it's a chance to converse and hear and share. That's part one. The other is that I have some ideas on ways to have the icebreaker similar, but keep it very short. And I'll send it as an email. So
excellent. Thank you. Really great suggestions. And I think that you can see, just as we're starting to get familiar with this, how I think, depending on the facilitator and the note taker, you'll be able to put kind of your own feel or taste on this dialogue. Any other thoughts on 1 through 6? Excellent. Great work. So right now, I think we're going to look at some of the outreach questions. And I think Maddie's going to pull that document up. That was on the spreadsheet as well as you have those. Do all of you have the questions? Awesome. Let's look at the first one. And that is, what have your experience at the Capitol been like for you? Or if you haven't been to the Capitol, what is your perception of the Capitol? How does the Capitol reflect your community? And how does it not? How do you think the Capitol needs to change? And what do you think should remain the same? What values would you like to see the Capitol Area Architectural and Planning Board to use when making decisions about monuments, memorials, and works of art at the Capitol, as well as what would make you more likely to visit the Capitol? Let's pause there real quick. 1 through 5, how do we feel about those questions? And again, any other suggestions or dialogue we can send over to Maddie or Emmett, and we can compile some of those suggestions, but maybe just a couple of voices. How do we feel about those opening first 5 questions? Good. Let's move down to the yes/no questions. And again, some of these may feel a little redundant, but it's, have you ever been to the Capitol? Do you feel welcome at the Capitol? And I think that's a key question. Do you see yourself reflected in the monuments, memorials, and works at the Capitol? Do you enjoy visiting the Capitol? And do you have suggestions for the people that make decisions about monuments, memorials, and work of art? Thoughts about those questions, a yes and no, 1 through 5. Do you feel comfortable with those, Christina?
I feel like these would be great poll questions in a Zoom meeting, and then people could see instant engagement with regards to who's in the meeting as to how, the data, like most people in the meeting have been to the Capitol or have not been to the Capitol.
Mm-hmm. And for those who aren't familiar, Christina, with poll questions, if you want to share just a little bit about what they are.
Sure. In Zoom, and it unfortunately does require a more expensive subscription.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same subscription as having breakout rooms. But you can actually run polls where everyone in the meeting would answer an on-screen question, and then right after you close the poll, the results are available to see by everyone, so that A, you can create instant engagement, and B, folks in the room have an understanding of the participants in the room.
Excellent. So please, yeah, send that over to Maddie and Emmett, and that may also be a way to save some time throughout the meeting as well. Ted, I see your hand is up. No? Okay. Excellent.
Ted, you may be on mute there, it looks like.
Oh.
Can I start again? I'm having difficulty understanding the difference between open-ended questions and yes/no questions. And I frankly think the yes/no questions are more direct. I found myself, as we were talking about this for the first time, realizing that, well, I'll start with number 2. I had revisions for number 1. But how does the capital reflect your communities? How do you think the capital needs to change? For me, would be more dynamic if the word how came out. Does the capital reflect your communities? Do you think it needs to change? The how adds in not only that you identify that it does or doesn't reflect your community, but you have to then come up with an answer of how it reflects your community. I just think I'm thinking about the dynamics of meetings and trying to ask a range of questions and coming back and asking what I think are almost the same questions in yes or no. And I'll quit at that.
Excellent. Thank you. And please send those suggestions over so we can capture that. Geeta?
Well, I'll also echo that, what Ted said. I hadn't noticed that, but I agree that I think open-ended questions 1 through 3 are a little bit over in the yes/no questions, as long as there's a long space to write. But if we're doing a quick Zoom poll with the yes/no questions, it might need to be a shorter answer than the open-ended questions. So maybe they just need to be a little refined and put the yes/no questions first, kind of for the meeting, and then people have longer space to do the open-ended questions maybe at the end or something, but maybe it's just an ordering or refining of those. Okay, thank you.
Excellent, Geeta. Emmett, you may have some comments about the questions.
Certainly. So just so that members of the task force know, the reason that there are kind of 3 sections here is that the idea is that some of these questions could be used during the meetings that you all will be hosting, and then they could also be on the survey that's hosted on the CAP board website, so that when folks that aren't participating in meetings but who would like to provide input go to that survey, they have 3 different options for, they can do longer form answers for 1 through 5 in the open-ended. We've gotten some good suggestions here about language edits for those, and then the yes or no questions as well, and then the ranking questions. The yes or no and the ranking questions too are in place, imagining that if we are successful in the online survey, for example, and get 5,000 or 10,000 responses, we'll need some sort of binary or ranking questions to start sifting through the data to understand kind of on a large scale where some of the public voice is, and then also imagining 10,000 responses to those open-ended questions. We'll have to engage some data analysts who can do word tracking and things like that to start getting at the themes that emerge from those open-ended questions. That's just a little bit of context for the task force about kind of the 3 sections here and how it combines both with the survey that participants in these meetings could take, and then also just the conversation in the meetings.
Excellent. Thank you, Emmett, for clarifying that as well. Christina, is your hand still up?
It is.
Okay.
In running meetings online, I am wondering if it would be acceptable, as I've done this before and it seems to work really well, is to use the yes/no questions in a poll, but to use them as an opening for the open-ended questions. So you would poll your audience with, have you ever been to the Capitol? Everybody participates, yes, no. You could then say, if yes, you know, a really quick second poll, how often? But then it would be your hook and lead into the open-ended questions to get people to talk about their experiences. Or if they hadn't been there, what their perceptions are. And then number 2, you could do another quick poll and, you know, get the temperature of the room on the question, and then go right into the open-ended question to get, you know, to dig deeper into getting people to open up to talk about their experiences.
Excellent. Thank you. Great suggestions. And please continue to get maybe some of those thoughts and wordsmithing over to either Maddie, myself. At this time, I think we're almost ready for our break, and I know it's time for me to head to my other meeting. At this time, is Commissioner Robert Davis online?
I can check and see if Commissioner Roberts Davis is available. At this point, I know she might be finishing up an executive council meeting.
Yes.
Carl, would you want to take the short break now?
Folks, how do we feel, folks? Are we pretty comfortable with taking a break right now? We've done a lot of work, and I'm so proud of the steps we made so far. So yes, let's go ahead and take our break right now. And again, continue to send your thoughts and responses over to Emmett and Maddie. And for myself, I have to run to another meeting, so I wish you all to stay well and stay safe. Thank you all.
And I think we can reconvene at 11 o'clock so we'll take a 7-minute break. Hi, folks. This is Emmett here. So Commissioner Roberts Davis is still in that other meeting. It'll likely be another 5 or 10 minutes. If it's all right with you, I could just kind of share the next couple of potential agenda items, and then you all could start discussion, and then I can update the commissioner when she joins. Is that okay with folks?
Fine.
So I think the next agenda item that had been on Carl's list was to walk over the PowerPoint presentation and just get that in front of the group for a little bit of a discussion, and then specific edits over to Maddie. Ted, I know, for example, on Monday that you had mentioned some needed edits on that one, so we could pull that one up and then just hear folks' thoughts, and we can make sure that we're recording all these edits. And again, I think the idea for this is that whatever eventual form it takes, it could be used at the beginning for the 5-minute presentation, so that folks participating in these meetings have a little bit of the background and know why they're being asked to participate, and how their information that they share will be used. So are there any high-level kind of overall edits or changes that we'd want to see? And then if there are specific either language edits or just kind of the reworking of specific slides, I think we could definitely process those on the staff level if you all sent them over. So happy to tackle it from either high level or specific edits if folks have thoughts.
So Emmett, yeah, I had sent a note out, and I had spoken about creating this document, and I'd like to take the time today to look at the language a bit. But I did have a draft with some graphics plugged in just for the first sheet, which labeled as page 2, breaking that into three sheets, and some ideas of a presentation, which I'm happy to press forward with as a draft and can send it to you and to the other staff, et cetera. I think, it's right now the document, the important part of reviewing the document, and I'm glad it's in just 6 pages, is to give us a chance to comprehensively look at the written content. But I believe in terms of presenting it to a group, it would help to establish the physical setting and also reinforce the feeling for the group process. We can do that graphically, I believe. And let me, as I said, I'll put together a multi-part response. I'm thankful that you sent it out as a PowerPoint document, so I could drop it into PowerPoint and play with it that way. So if I do that work, should I just send it directly to you, or should I send it to Carl as well, or others on the committee? What would you recommend?
I think if you send it to Chair Crawford and then to me and Maddie, that
Okay.
we could incorporate it, and to all of the members on the task force, as you send edits in, what we can do is similar to that task force charter, where you saw all of the different edits compiled. We can compile the edits and then send it back out to the whole group so that you can see all of the different suggested edits.
Okay. So you recommended to Chairman Crawford, Maddie, and that was it, or others?
Yep, those two, and you could also copy me on it if you'd like.
Okay,
but
you got it.
Maddie and I are working together on it, so. One suggestion too that we could do is to shift some of the content that you see on slides 2, 3, and 4 into the notes section during the presentation. So you all as presenters of this would have some of the background information in the case that specific questions came up, but that the actual content on the slides would be more graphic oriented and would be less text dense. That's another option that we could work to incorporate if folks thought that was useful.
Emmett, is it your thought that this introductory piece would be a prepared slide video that could be dropped into the beginning of a meeting to keep it to that 7 to 10 minute window? Or is it something, is it a slideshow that you thought each of the presenters would present?
The way that Chair Crawford has been thinking about it, I think, is that it would be up to each of the kind of the presenters to kind of lead their groups through this presentation, and it would take, it would be up to them to kind of keep it on track and to keep it below 10 minutes. The prepared video, I think, might be difficult from a staff level to pull that together in a way that would kind of reflect and be flexible enough so that each group participating would be able to engage with it. So I think it might make more sense if each of the co-hosts kind of walked through this slide deck with the groups that they're meeting with. And that way it allows for each of the folks that are doing the co-hosting to kind of make the meeting their own, so to speak. I know Commissioner Roberts Davis has been able to join, so I can turn it over to her to move on to the next agenda item, which is the note-taking spreadsheet, and we'll be able to pull that up. But just before we move on, sounds like what we can do is we'll wait, let's set a deadline of this Friday. I'll check with Chair Crawford to see if that works with him for edits. And so if you want to send in edits, please do that. And then we can send that back out to all task force members so that you all can see what the potentially revised PowerPoint would look like. And if there are any major concerns or anything like that, please feel free to either share them now or you can email them as well.
I have a quick question. I was thinking about what Christina brought up at the last meeting on Monday about the intentional statement around bringing in not unrepresented voices. And did we have consensus that we were going to put something about that, like a statement in this PowerPoint, or would it be a verbal thing? I just wanted to know, because if we did have consensus around adding something of that language, I can just send it in an email. I think I did copy everyone on an email. I didn't mean to do that. I was sending it to Maddie, but I just wondered to hear from others about that idea of the intentional statement at the outset for the meetings. Does anyone else remember about that? Thank you.
I don't recall getting to that effect. I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about that, Keita.
Commissioner, it's a little difficult on your audio. I'm not sure if other folks are not hearing you clearly as well.
I did not get an email from you, Keita. I don't know if you want to share a little bit more what the overall thought was in that.
Yeah, I just remember we kind of, I don't know exactly, but I remember it was something Christina had brought up, and I thought it was a good idea of having some kind of intentional statement about voices and recognizing cultural voices and different groups that feel underrepresented, and how to make it clear that one reason the task force is doing this work at this moment is trying to find those voices. Actually, I think you maybe remember that from Monday, right? So then I had emailed just a quick, maybe 3 sentences of a statement that I thought, and maybe we could all craft it together as part of the PowerPoint, I thought, at the beginning. So whatever people think about the easiest way to do that, I liked that shared document where people maybe add, and then we can look at it as different people suggesting how to word it.
So I think that's great. I think that was around the communication piece of it that we were talking about, how we wanted to talk to people about the work that we were doing and how we were bringing lots of different people to the table. Is that how am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, that's it.
So I know that you said that you'd sent it to Madeline. Madeline, do you want to pull that into the PowerPoint? And then I think that the direction that we heard from Emmett is that at the next meeting, we'll look at all of the different suggestions for changes to the PowerPoint universally and then make some decisions then. Does that work for you, Geeta?
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Yep, I will make that addition to the PowerPoint.
Wonderful. And then I see,
and
go ahead.
just a logistics point here, and one that Chair Crawford had been discussing in a pre-meeting, is thinking about how we kind of begin these meetings and the outreach while also incorporating all the edits. His suggestion was that if you all send in edits, we can incorporate them and do a couple of rounds of email updates to folks, and that then you could express concerns. But if there weren't major concerns, we could reach consensus over email and have those documents ready so that we wouldn't have to call another 2 meetings or 1 meeting of this full group before outreach begins with specific communities. Is that something that, are there any concerns with Chair Crawford's thinking on that? And I'm happy to loop him back in with any of the suggestions that folks have.
More efficient, even better. Love it. Great. Looks like Christina, your hand is raised.
It is. I also sent a short statement to Maddie with regards to what Geeta brought up. And thank you, Geeta, for mentioning this and keeping it alive. I'm assuming that Maddie got it.
Yes, I have your statement of intention. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you for those of you who followed up already. Any other thoughts before we move on to the note-taking spreadsheet? Okay. So Madeline, I'll ask that were you pulling those up on the screen before, or should we each just pull them up individually? Oh, there we go. Okay, hopefully everyone has had a chance to at least take a look at this. Are there any initial reactions to the note-taking spreadsheets? Any thoughts at all?
And I can note, Commissioner, and everyone, that the changes that you've suggested for the outreach questions, we can make sure to reflect those changes in the text here that you see in the blue categories, so that whatever ends up being the final outreach questions document is the same here in the outreach questions. And Mariah Levinson, who had helped provide some of the thinking behind how a note-taking spreadsheet like this might be put to good use, suggested that the main ideas column could be used to kind of note the main ideas that individual people share during their comments, and that the key themes column could be useful in kind of pulling together some of the high-level themes that emerge from the group's conversation. So that's a little bit of context behind the main ideas versus key themes there, just to provide some context for folks.
So the way that I'm reading this is not necessarily a spreadsheet where you would fill it out across. You might be kind of filling it out in lists, like here are different, and they might not necessarily correspond to what a person is saying. You might be just jotting down main ideas and themes that you're hearing, but then also what different people are saying in answers to the questions that are posed. Representative Erdahl, did you have something to add?
Well, I'm just wondering, and maybe you're touching on it procedurally, how this works.
Yeah.
I mean, is this individual? Is it group? I mean, how, again,
I think you've frozen on us there, Representative. Ted, did you have something to add?
I think I'm asking the same question Dean did. As I look at this, I like the spreadsheet a lot because as a note, often a note taker and expecting the type of back and forth and discussions that would occur, I could see this as being, in fact, a method to summarize notes and comments from the people in the meeting, and that this document, the spreadsheet, which would be not linear, but organized first by main ideas, and then under a main idea, 4 or 5 themes that developed, and then filling that out further. That way it would make it possible if we have 10 or 20 or 100 separate Zoom meetings that are recorded, there is a uniform collection of ideas and that and themes that would give us at least, again, recognizing all the differences in language and the rest of that. But I think it could give us a lot stronger response than trying to have whatever that number is, we'll say between 20 and 100 public meetings, which have minutes taken by people, et cetera. And someone, I think Emmett mentioned, having staff go back and try and weave through that and come up with common themes. I think this lets the note taker, I personally, were I taking the minutes, would be delighted to summarize pages of just comments and come back to principal themes and subsets of that, describing those. So I like this, but I'm saying I'm hoping I'm understanding it correctly.
Representative Erdahl, did you want to finish your statement? I think you froze halfway through. I think we lost you now. I think the other thing that I do like about this is that it gives you some distance as the feedback provider. There's nothing tied to any specific person. It's kind of just more thematic and not necessarily reflective of what any person said. So I think that that's something that we could even share with people who are providing feedback, that this is not any particular person's opinion, but more so just themes that we're jotting down, which is probably beneficial for a lot of people to hear. Oh. You're back. There you are. We can hear you loud and clear now. Yes.
Yeah, I lost my connection.
There you are.
I'm still, I still have the same question. Procedurally, how does this work? I mean, yes, I'm still wondering.
So I think the way that Ted talked it through is that it's more of just a high level, it's more thematic and more high level than actual what people said, which might be easier for us to transfer from meeting to meeting instead of trying to really get down to more granularly what people are giving as feedback, which might be easier for us to roll up at the end of the day instead of really trying to look at what individual feedback looked like.
Okay, I have a little bit better understanding.
Yeah. Geeta, did you have a different thought on that or want to share something additional?
Yeah, I guess I have a little confusion around it, just probably because I have less experience with Excel. But I'm thinking if a co-host or the co-host is the tabulator, and the note taker, would it possibly be an option to just do the long form throughout the meeting and then fill the form out after by going through the meeting, especially if it is depending on the size of the meeting and how that feels with the actual form. I think if I were a co-host with the note-taking job, I might have a tendency to do more of just like a quick note where it's just like a long Word document and then go through and add it to this form after. But does that seem like, is that what you were saying about just depending meeting per meeting?
Yeah. You may want to do the note taking and then put it in the form later. Yes. Maybe some understanding of how the information is going to be compiled from Emmett maybe would be helpful in understanding the form.
Yep, and I'm happy to share a little bit. So, Maddie, would you be willing to pull it back up actually, and I can just explain at least how on the back end at a staff level we plan on pulling this information together. So, in the two green columns, the way that we thought about it, and this we can obviously change this if it doesn't sound intuitive to you all, but Representative Erdahl, to your question about procedure, I think we were thinking about those two green columns as ones that the note taker and the facilitator could talk about and fill out after the meeting. So for example, it won't be until the end of the discussion that you'll have time to talk through and identify some of the key themes and explain those and some of the main ideas that emerged. If you are the note taker, you can do as Gita just mentioned and do a Word document and take notes like that if you'd like to help process those main ideas and key themes. The idea behind the blue segments would be that that's where you could, and as the commissioner had mentioned, you would start, it would be a vertical down. So you'd start in, at the very top, and every time someone spoke to a comment about their experiences at the Capitol, you could just note with a couple of words or however long you wanted to make that comment. And then if the next person spoke to that same question, you could just move down to the next row within that column. And so the idea would be that the blue section might have a little bit more detailed information that you could use as kind of a running segment for notes during the meeting. And if there's a lot of commentary and if there are a ton of answers and discussion about any of those questions, then that column would end up being, it would have a ton of different rows. It would extend down the sheet a ways. And then at the end, you could use the blue section and what you remember from the discussion to kind of flesh out the main ideas and key themes section. And then what staff would do is after that meeting, you would send it to us and we would copy and paste and begin compiling the main ideas and the key themes and some of the specific answers to the outreach questions in a larger document, a global spreadsheet that would then have, by the end, probably thousands and thousands of different columns, I should say rows, that compile all of the different comments that we've heard during the meetings. So that information combined with the info that we get in the surveys would be data that we then use and analyze to kind of come up with some of the metrics, I shouldn't say metrics, some of the data that we might provide to you all as a staff level to then you all would be able to draw conclusions or themes from that. Does that make sense?
To me, that makes it more plain. Thank you.
It does make sense.
Yeah, thank you. That makes it very clear. Thank you.
So knowing that the blue columns will be updated to reflect the changes that we made earlier today, are there any other changes that we need to this spreadsheet? Okay, so do we feel ready to move on to agenda item 3E, which is discussing the timeline? Oh, looks like there's a question. Oh, Alicia? I think you're on mute.
I'm gonna get this right eventually. I was just going to say that I think it looks fine. I think in terms of capturing data, I think the sort function in Excel would be really nice. If we can make sure if you're defining your main ideas the same way, that's the only kind of drawback I would see. If you had two words that were similar for the same main idea, that might be a little bit challenging. But I like the way it's laid out, and I think. For me, I'm thinking about how I would note take. I think it will force me to, keep words very succinct. And maybe there might be another column that just says comment for additional comments. That would be my only other offer.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other comments, I think we're ready to go on to the timeline. So from my understanding, the timeline is all notes and edits are due to Maddie by Friday. That's this Friday, December 4th. And then back out to us by Friday the 11th. So 1 week later, we will get the revisions, and that we will begin our meetings by mid-December. And so I assume, Emmett, that we'll get a little bit more direction around how those meetings will be set up, who will set them up, and the logistics around that between now and then.
Yep, and I think that's one of the parts of this agenda item that Chair Crawford was hoping to discuss and hear what the group thinks. But I think his thinking was, and the way the conversation has been tracking, is that each of the co-hosts, so the facilitator and the note taker, will kind of work together to figure out what time, when works to do the meeting for both of them, and then to do the outreach to the community. So it is not a centralized process. It is a more decentralized process, which it sounded, at least in the first couple of meetings 2 weeks ago from the group, like what the consensus was, and the desire was to have a little bit more of an opportunity for individual members of the task force to work with a co-host and set up a meeting or multiple meetings with members of the communities that they'd like to speak with, and then submit those notes back to the staff and to the chair so that we can start compiling in a more central way. Okay.
And so I won't ever be asked to guest chair again, because I'm going to start asking a lot of questions that cause trouble. But just wondering, is there an invitation that we should be using, or some sort of uniform, something that we should be sending out as we're setting up these meetings, or can we pull something like that together so that everybody's kind of working off of the same type of information to invite these groups to the meetings?
It's a good question. We can look into it from a staff level. One question for this group would be, do folks have access to Zoom or other meeting platforms that they would be able to host? I think the reality is that it will be up to each of you as task force members to kind of host the meetings and send out the link to the folks that will be participating. And so I think talking through that and hearing from you all what you feel comfortable with and what support you might need would be important, because I think the expectation is that this would kind of be, co-hosts go off and conduct these meetings themselves without staff support, and then simply report back with the note-taking form the kind of results of those meetings, and then at a staff level we begin compiling for the group.
But even to the extent of what it is that I'm in, the language that I'm using, to who I am, what it is that I'm inviting you to, what you to do, and what you should be expecting to do in this.
I didn't catch the very end of that, Commissioner, but if I understand correctly, the question is kind of, what about the beginning process for even doing the outreach and things? If folks on the task force would like, we could draw up some potential, 5 steps that could be used to initiate the process and send it out if task force members would find that helpful, we could do that. Kind of a guide, so to speak, that's a little more detail based than the in-meeting guide that we discussed earlier today.
Maybe I missed something in that, I apologize, but I'm thinking of maybe just like a little invitation, like maybe my comms team could be helpful with that, even just here's who I am and why I'm inviting you to this meeting and what we plan to accomplish. In a one-pager that would get people familiar with what it is that we're accomplishing here. So we can connect offline on that. That's helpful. Right? Is there anything else that we should be reviewing?
I think those were the main items that Chair Crawford had on his list. So moving forward, it sounds like that if you are able, task force members, to send your edits to the various documents that we've discussed today to Maddie by Friday, then next week we can send out the kind of revisions, the proposed group revisions, and then you can provide feedback back to staff about which ones of those we feel comfortable with. And if there are no major concerns about those proposed changes, then by next Friday, we could finalize those set of documents. And then we can also work to work with Chair Crawford on his thinking behind how we organize the outreach, for example. And I saw a comment about the common meeting invites, for example, things like that. So we can follow up via email on those fronts.
I see quite a few hands up. I saw Representative Erdahl's hand first.
Thank you. And I just, because it's something that we're supposed to know as we present these meetings, I think it'd be to have Paul Mandel again review for the different roles that the Historical Society, the Department of Administration, the CAP, regarding the placement of monuments and art. So, Paul, could you just review that again, please?
Do you want that? You want that right now?
Well, it could be next time. I don't care.
I can
Whatever.
give you the quick and dirty version. I don't know if I'm serving Madam Chair or
yes, please.
On the Capitol grounds, memorials and monuments are strictly the jurisdiction of the CAP board, unless and until such time as something is deemed to be removed, in which case it becomes the property or disposition of the Historical Society. They are maintained by the Department of Administration, which has just gone through restoration of virtually all the memorials on the Capitol grounds this past summer. Inside the Capitol building, in the public and ceremonial spaces, the rotunda, the governor's reception room, the chambers, and all the public corridors that you would normally pass through as part of your tours, that is under the jurisdiction of the CAP board and Historical Society, with Historical Society being the final arbiter. As Christina Woods mentioned, I believe yesterday and maybe today also, the new spaces, there's about 30 to 40,000 square feet of new public space created during the Capitol restoration that Department of Administration administers. And as part of that, the the statutorily mandated advisory group, of which Christina is co-chair, have a process for selecting and soliciting art in those areas. That's predominantly the third floor, east wing, up in the 300s, and the basement space, and there's a few other side spaces, but that's a separate process. Those are non-historic because they were created just during the last restoration project. They are public, but not historic or ceremonial. Is that adequate?
Yes, it is. Thank you for doing that. Maybe just a email out to us.
We can send out that chart again.
Why don't you do that? Just something I think is important that we all are very cognizant of.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course, the Department of Administration, as the landlord, maintains the entire Capitol building. Historical Society as the curator, I guess, would be responsible for like the painting, the quality of the paintings and the protection. Like they were responsible for adding glass, I think, under the restoration project to the governor's portraits for protection purposes. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Clear as mud, right?
I think the next hand that I saw was Christina.
Thank you. I'm thinking about the timeline, and we haven't talked about our end date with regards to holding our meetings. Did I hear correctly that mid-December is when we start our what I will call focus groups? Did I hear that correctly?
Mid-December is the date. Yes.
Okay.
That is a good question. I don't know how much time we have for the completion of the meetings. I'll ask if Carl has given us any direction on that. Emmett, do you know how much time we have?
Yep, I think Carl's thinking was that that mid-December date is kind of a target to begin thinking about meetings, not like it's a hard, we must meet beginning mid-December. I think he is just cognizant of the fact that the sooner we get going on some of these focus groups, I think that's a good term for them, Christina, the sooner that we'll be able to start understanding how much feedback we're getting, and then that can help inform what I think he is imagining as potential for larger public discussions in the next spring. The task force timeline initially had been focused on producing a report by the spring, but I think that given COVID complications and the fact that we're really going to hopefully dive in on these focus groups, which is the consensus of the group from the first couple of meetings, that timeline has been extended a little bit to allow for the three kind of stages of input: the focus groups, the survey that's ongoing, and then potential in-person meetings in the spring and or summer, with the goal of some sort of report by the summer or early fall.
I just wanted to say that given that we don't have like a common invitation or some other things that I think would be helpful, I would find it difficult to get some dates on the calendar and actually get people to the table by mid-December. I mean, I would certainly do my best. However, if these meetings could actually start right after the holidays, then that I think would be a more tangible timeline, and use the month of December to get invitations out and to get people organized.
I think that makes a ton of sense, and I'll make sure that in the meeting with Carl that we share that. And I think the idea behind that timeline was just to get folks thinking about the fact that at some point we'll need to move from kind of the planning stage into the outreach stage, but that early January makes a lot of sense in terms of actually holding some of the first meetings.
Ted, I see your hand.
Yes, most of my questions have just now been answered.
Okay.
But the timeline that the last one I printed out was the multi-page the advisory task force charter, and I was going to ask, and I'm thrilled with Christine's comments and Emmett's response, and thinking about January being the focus. What I would like to do is suggest, if possible, to think of January as being a primary focus for the public engagement meetings, broad public engagement, but also to have a sense, the way it's originally, the original schedule that I have in my hands had early January, a review of synthesis of input from online meetings, early January. And I'm assuming now that would potentially be moved to early February. My question that's for the the department and Carl to work through, is to refine that. And I would like to suggest that if in fact any of the public and major public input meetings should occur during the month of February, we're going to have a lot of work to do, I think, the balance of the month of December to get ready for that. So I'd like to just to get it clarified, that's all.
Okay. So I don't see any more hands. And so I think that means that we're ready to move into our closing exercise. The prompt that we are going to walk through is a 1 or 2 word takeaway from today's meeting. And I don't actually have a full list of all the attendees here, so I'm going to go by the participants list over here on the side. And I'm going to start with Alicia.
I would say productive and exciting.
Great, thank you. Christina. Are you on mute, Christina?
Yeah.
There you are.
I am very happy with how much we are able to accomplish as a group, and yet again feel very satisfied in the amount of space that each of our voices is getting through this process. So I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you. Representative Erdahl?
Well, I think we've again had some clarity today. We have a lot of work to do, but I think we're well on the road to doing.
Great. Ita?
Yeah, I would echo those same sentiments. I like the many voices and practical progress were my words.
Great. Paul?
Were you asking me? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Oh.
Yeah, you know you do.
Oh, I thought this was just for the committee. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. You're on my participant list.
I'm excited. Excited that people are taking ownership on this.
Good. Thank you. Maria?
Excitement and preparation. Those are the 2 words.
Wonderful. Senator Torres-Ray?
I think excitement and hope.
Wonderful. And Ted?
Clarity. Things are clearer now.
Very good. Is there anyone else who I have missed? Emmett, did you have a word?
Grateful.
Good. All right. Oh, I didn't go. Sorry to be late, but glad that I was able to make it for the last half of the meeting where there was just a lot of movement from Monday. So very thankful for that as well. Thank you, everyone. We're going to get 15 minutes extra back in your day. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk very soon. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gigawabamin.
Thank you.